Good Erev Shabbos, everyone. Erev Shabbos, Pashas Mattos, Masei in America, Masei in Eretz Yisrael. We're back on track with each other. This week, at least, we share one Pasha, one of the two, and the next week we're back together in Pashas Devarim. I wanted to share something. This is a story of the Chayzer from Lublin. That the Chayzer we know was very sensitive to physical things. A famous story about a barber and about how the fingers would cause him tremendous pain if the person wasn't a Yorei Shamayim, wasn't a person who feared heaven or wasn't a special person. They tell the story also about furniture, about things that he would sit on, that he would be sometimes in tremendous pain on couches and on chairs if they were made by, or there was somebody sat on them that wasn't a Yorei Shemaim, wasn't somebody who feared heaven, somebody wasn't an upright Jew, so then it would have an effect because his body was particularly sensitive to Kedusha, particularly sensitive to holiness. When he would come as a guest, people would be very worried because if he was in pain on the chairs that he was being put on, or on the bed that he was given, so then it would cause a tremendous embarrassment to people. He was coming to a certain town. There was a Rav that wanted him to stay in his house. The Rav was a little worried about, how comfortable the Chayzer would be and what perhaps the Chayzer would find just by sitting on his furniture and on his chairs. So he decided to get brand new furniture made. Brand new furniture, everything was done brand new, and he hired a person who was a big Yorei Shemayim to go and to fix the furniture and to make the furniture. And he had a whole new house, a whole new set of furniture in the living room and in one of the bedrooms, a bed for the Chayzer. Everything was, and he was confident that everything was going to be fine. So the Chayzer comes in and he sits down on a chair, and he jumps up and he screams. It's like needles. It's like needles, like knives. And he can't sit there. Goes to lie in the bed, he feels the same thing. So the Rav says, you know what, I have another bedroom and I have other chairs, and he puts him in another chair and he puts him in another bedroom, and everything is fine. Chayz is comfortable, everything is good. There's no problems. So later he asked the Chayz, he said, what were you feeling when you sat down on the chair? Like, why was it so terrible? So he said, he said, when I sat down on the chair, says, when I felt a tremendous amount of pain, but it was a different pain than usual. Usually when I sit on a chair of an unscrupulous person, so then I feel a certain type of pain. Says, but when I sat down on this chair, it wasn't the same kind of pain. It was a different pain. I felt overcome by depression. It just washed over me in such a painful, sad way. So Chayzer looks at the Rav and he says to him, when was this chair made? He said, it was made a few weeks ago. During the 3 weeks of mourning between the 17th of Tammuz and Tisha. And the Chayzer said, okay, now I understand. Nothing to do with scrupulous, not scrupulous. But it picked up that depression. And that sadness was painful to me. And I think from that story, there are two incredible things that we have to learn. The first is that there are actually people that are so sensitive that they can feel a sense of depression during this period of time of destruction of the temple. The people that feel a real sense of loss. And that fellow who made the furniture was able to transmit that into his work was incredible. But I think we learned something also fascinating from the Chayzer's reaction, that depression is painful. But how do we say that depression is painful? Isn't that the whole time? Isn't this whole period of time? We don't shave, we don't have haircuts, we don't We don't have simchas, we don't have joy, we don't listen to music. 9 days we pare down our lives. We don't buy new things. We don't eat meat, we don't drink wine. We retreat into ourselves, into a sense of mourning, into a sense of avelos. Why should the Chayza have been so overcome by the depression that he felt that was coming out of this period of time? It's an interesting halach on Tisha B'Av. The halach is you're not allowed to learn Torah. We're allowed to learn things that have to do with Tisha B'Av, things that are sad. It's really a small menu of things that we're allowed to learn. And the reason is because Pikudei Hashem, Yisharim Mesamchei Lev, that the commandments of Hashem are upright, they're straight, Mesamchei Lev, they make a person happy. There's a tremendous simcha, a tremendous joy in learning Torah. But we have to understand what exactly is that joy of learning Torah. If we look at the morning on Tisha B'Av, we can perhaps understand what the joy of learning Torah is. Because what is the real sadness of this time? The real sadness of this time is not destructions of temples. The real sadness of this time is not the knocking out of buildings. The real sadness of this time is disconnection from God. It's the fact that we're living behind the mechitza shel barzel, that we're living behind a partition between us and God, and that we're sitting alone. Eicha yoshva badad. That we sit alone, disconnected, not feeling that sense of oneness with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. These are the days, the 21 days that lead up to Tisha B'Av, the days of mourning, the days of sadness, is to remind ourselves that there is an aloneness, there is a terrible aloneness. On Tisha B'Av, we live through that aloneness. We call out that aloneness. Alas, how we sit alone. Jerusalem sits alone. The city that was once so amazing is now sitting so bereft and badad and so alone. Learning Torah is an amazing thing. Because what learning Torah does to us is that it connects us. It connects us to every other Jew. It connects us to our world. It connects us to our God. Davening is us speaking to God. Learning Torah is God speaking to us. It's not just learning Daf Yomi that we know we're connected to other Jews. It's not just the fact that the parasha is the same all around the world, well, most of the world, but this Shabbos at least, it is Masei we're reading all around the world. That's not just the connection. The connection is the realization that I'm living for the same thing you're living. That my ultimate Jewish values are the same as your ultimate Jewish values. Sometimes we don't always recognize them. But that my heart and your heart are connected to each other. Because we're connected through Torah. On the day of the commemoration of the separation that exists between Jews and God and between Jews and Jews, so then that simcha that comes out of learning Torah, that's not so appropriate. That's why we don't learn Torah on Tisha B'Av. Because that joy of connectedness is the antithesis of the day, which is the recognition of the separateness of the Jewish people. But feeling that loneliness, it's not really so terrible. Because it allows me to appreciate what the antidote to loneliness is. The antidote to loneliness is ultimate connection, which is through my Torah and through connecting myself to Torah. And the more I connect myself to Torah, then by definition, the more I'm going to feel connected both to God and to the Jewish people. And therefore, within that avelus, within that mourning, within that sadness of the realization that I am sitting alone, doesn't exist depression, but it gives me a new appreciation and a feeling for what it means to be together. When it's filled with a depression, that's destructive. It's not productive. Ultimately gets us nowhere. And that was the pain that the Chayzer felt. The needles, the knives that were being thrust into his body. Because depression is not avelus. Depression is not mourning. Depression is giving up hope. Depression is despair. And that's not what this period of time is. This period of time is to contemplate and to think about what's missing in our lives. The connectivity, the togetherness. How lonely it is. And what I pine away for. And to recognize that I have it in my hands. I have that medicine, that antidote to loneliness. It's sitting in my hands. It's the Torah that I learn and the Torah that I live. And the sadness of being alone gives way to the joy of being connected. If I can mourn over Jerusalem and feel that aloneness and recognize how to remedy it, I will immediately be able to see its joy, because I will immediately be able to commit myself and recognize what it means to be connected. When I can connect myself, Raya b'simchasa, I see the joy of being Jewish, the joy of being connected to the Jewish people, the joy of being connected to the Ribono Shel Olam, and the joy of that ultimate connectivity, the Torah. These Shabbos now, as difficult as they are in the middle of the 9 days, next Shabbos, Tisha B'Av itself, are incredible Shabbos, because they remind us of what it means to be connected, of what it means not to be alone. And it gives us the strength to be able to cry over that lack of connectivity, and to cry over it in order to be able to be committed to do something about it, rather than to cry over it and become depressed. So when the Chayzer sits on our chairs, the Chayzer sits down comfortably, because it's productive, forward-moving, and not filled with a sense of yush, a sense of despair. The simcha of Shabbos is real, and we need to appreciate it. And we need to recognize that it's through Shabbos, through Torah, through mitzvahs. That's ultimately the way we repair ourselves and the way we repair our world. Everyone should have a beautiful, amazing, wonderful Shabbos.